Chop.
Hello. Yeah.
I'm good tonight.
Timmy, how are you? Very well, thank you.
Tomorrow morning, Chop.
No, I'm being called out the door. What's up? Cook a little rice with it or something, will you? Something, you know, either rice or noodles. Okay, Timmy. I'll talk to you later. Bye. Why do you have to know about my rice and noodles? Huh?
I didn't know what you were going to say.
Rice and noodles. What if you'd walked in here and I was talking business?
Some personal matters, Jack, possibly.
No.
You look cute today in your red shirt, hon. All right, now what have I got to do? It's 8 o'clock. Why are we starting now? Is he crazy?
They're trying to finish it, Jack, for weeks.
Well, let's get him finished. Let's get him out of here. Huh? Finished with the assignment. Beautiful. Excellent work. Great work.
Can I have a look in your back?
Yeah, you want to go in with me while I go?
No.
This is Jack.
I do have to go. It's pretty neat, huh? See?
Does it work, Jack?
Toothbrush? I'll brush my teeth for you,
Tell
Viv.
me why.
Okay. I always brush my teeth before I report back in for work.
Why?
Consideration for my co-workers. It's grueling enough without a face full of lamb cutlets. They'll be so grateful to me now.
What?
They'll be so grateful. They'll say, look at that Jack. He doesn't come down, even though it's midnight.
That's not true. It's 8 o'clock.
And Lord knows what he's been doing. He's down here, and he has a fresh and sparkling breath. You see? Now, you'll have to excuse me now because I'm going to take a piss. Thank you. God, why don't you get some shots of me when I'm great looking and everything?
You're looking fine.
You better get first cut on this film, Jack.
Let me ask you a question, Tara. We're indoors. I don't need the big coat, do I?
Nice and warm.
Good job. Good show. There's some lights out here. Oh, I keep wanting to let you go ahead of me. Every little breeze is simply whispering Louise. Come on, Louise, give me a hug and a squeeze. Every little breeze that I feel in my heart. There? I don't think you told me the truth. It's quite chilly in here. Well, there's a lot of just plain sweater men in here, so we're probably all right.
Yeah, they're not all that big, Jack. Some of them are really hardy teams. We're straight through the...
Straight on through. This will no doubt be a little lurkage.
What?
Lurkage
is right.
Thanks, Brian.
Merci. Jimmy Durani's walk all the way from my toilet. What do you think of it?
It's good now.
Beautiful.
Let me explain this to you, Jack.
Okay. Salt?
Yeah.
Right.
Come on, you. Oh, come on, Dad. Come on.
Ryan, are you ready? Well, wait for Shelley. Shelley,
Die.
Alright, you just say turn over when you're ready, Stanley. Alright, okay. Good boy. Right, turn on the video. Yes, Stanley. Turn video. Okay, okay. Yeah, okay. Danny, you gotta listen to Stanley.
He's coming! Come on, scare him! Look back again, Danny! Scare him, Danny! Look back, Danny! Look back! Scare him! Danny! Look back, Danny! Start to slow down! Start to slow down! See the door! See the door! Look at the cover!
Good. I think the last three were quite good. I think the last two were better, previous two. Okay, let him go. No, he's gonna...
Let's play back the last 4 takes. All in.
All right, Dad?
Oh, don't let's see him, man. Oh, get on, Ian. Get out of the way.
All I thought about is what
What? What do you think about?
all I thought about is what my mom and my dad was gonna buy me
Gonna buy you? For what?
with all that money.
Uh-huh. And do you know how much you were going to be earning per week?
No, really, I didn't
Did
know.
they tell you?
I didn't know really how much I was gonna. I didn't know really I was gonna earn any money. No, I just thought I would just get $2 or so.
Yeah?
So,
A bit of pocket money, huh?
yeah.
Yeah, right.
And so now I know I probably have $500 or $600.
How did you find working with this little guy, Danny Lloyd, and was it enjoyable? Was it?
It was beautiful. Just like my son. If you see tears, it will be tears of joy. Because I thank the Lord I'm here, was able to work with such beautiful people. I'll never forget this.
This is the way that I saw Boris Karloff Marx's lines. I've copied it ever since. Then, simply by picking them up and reading, it turns me into a freaking monster.
That's the interjection, right?
Yep.
I'm gonna go now. I'll be back by tomorrow morning at the latest.
Wendy,
Yes?
you've got a surprise coming to you. You're not going anywhere. Try the snowcat on the radio and you'll see what I mean.
Jack, I'm sorry. I had to do it. There's something wrong with you, and I had to lock you in.
Wendy, open the goddamn door.
I'm sorry. I really had all time.
Wendy, listen to me. Let me out of here, and I'll forget the whole damn thing. Wendy, listen to me. Let me out of here, and I'll forget the whole damn thing.
It might be better to just play it as a medium shot with the situation. The other thing, maybe.
Can you do it with your head down? Yeah. Well, that's not bad. Do that. Try that, Jack.
Wendy, listen to me. Let me out of here and I'll forget the whole damn thing. It'll be like it never happened.
You couldn't find some way of sort of not looking at her and looking down as you say the line.
I'm gonna go now. I'm gonna try to get Danny down to Sidewinder and the snowcat today. I'll bring back a doctor.
Wendy?
I'm gonna go now.
Wendy?
Yes.
You've got a big surprise coming to you. You're not going anywhere. Go check out the snowcat in the radio and you'll see what I mean. Go check it out. Go check it out. Go check it out.
Very good, Jack. Excellent. Right, check the gate, Doug.
Now, it's not the script. I've given it to Philip. He's going to mull over it, you see. And would you like to mull over it?
I'd love to mull over it, Junia.
You're not even...
No. I mean, I have some time this evening.
No, the thing is, this won't...
I wasn't planning on doing anything between midnight
What I'm
and
trying
2.
to say
And
is that's not the real script. It's just
this
an
is
idea
just
of what you did.
an idea to get started on. Very good. Filmmaking. Get these things. We make it up as we go along. Don't we, Viv?
And why is the script in multicolored pages? Anything?
Each time you make a new version, at first you get very methodical, and each time you make a new version, you put in different color. After a while, you're lucky if people get copies of the changes.
It's so that you start with white, then you go to blue, then pink, then green, then yellow.
But what happens
It's so that when everybody's got their script out, you can look right over and know if they've got the latest version. But of course, you never have the latest
Blue or
version.
yellow isn't significant to the... just colors.
I quit using my script. I just take the ones they type up each day.
Aren't you exaggerating a little bit?
No. The average celebrity meets in 1 year 10 times the amount of people that the average person meets in his entire life.
And Mr. and Mrs. Piggott, Mr. Kubrick, and Mr. Willis. Mr. Kubrick, and that's Mr. Val.
How do you do?
This is incredible.
Well, this is just supposed to be...
Hi, Mr. Nicholson, how are you? Very nice to meet you. And this is all our gang. Mrs. Willis. And Katie, and Liza, they're so excited. And Mr. and Mrs. Piggott. How do you do? And Mr. Willis, and Mr. Piggott.
Jack's such a big star, such a famous personality, that people do tend to be a bit sycophantic with him. But it wasn't everyone, but some people did. And it wasn't entirely ineffectual. I mean, I did get jealous sometimes, I must admit.
Why was that?
Well, it was mostly between takes, not during work. I mean, when we were actually working on a scene, that did not interfere at all. But on occasions when we were just sitting around or about to come to work or standing by in our rooms, whatever. I mean, there were times where I felt a bit jealous because he got very, very much attention. And I suppose I like attention.
Peter, no, it's okay, wait. No, I don't want you on the cold film. Oh, don't. It's okay.
Put this card in there as well.
No.
Boys, go away.
No, it's okay.
Right, all leave that word.
It comes and goes, and I've just been trying to
Oh, dear.
But it just got so bad.
Yes. Oh, God, thank God I came out. Why didn't you shout or something?
Oh, no, I tried to look bad.
Yeah. Or...
friendly first assistant being friendly. Is it in your dressing room?
From May until October, I was really in and out of ill health because the stress of the role was so great, and the stress of being away from home, just uprooted and moved somewhere else, and I had just gotten out of a relationship, and so for me it was just tumultuous.
Look at this. Pulled all my hair. I pulled hunks of hair out on the windowsill, and the back got caught.
Need you trim those.
Hunks of hair.
Oh, look.
Okay.
It just comes out.
Okay, right now, fellas.
No Russian.
There's more to come, Shell. Come on.
Come on, no
Let's get a
idea.
set up anyway now, boys.
Let's go. Come on, Sean. Get the dummy. No, she isn't carrying him. That's right. Okay, let's go.
No,
Have the finder, please, the 18. 18 in the tube, swing it all back in here, yeah. It's got to go outside there. What's time?
It is 25 to 1.
Well, don't sympathize with Shelley. It doesn't help you, wouldn't it?
Yes, it does. It does.
Something extremely lonely being from station.
Yes, I know.
Right, okay.
18.
Boys, want the video's got to be around here. Get this all set up.
Well, get us in there first, and then you lead. If that's true, Jack will come in from this end and stop over here.
Yeah.
What you saying? Okay.
And yeah, he'd run past in that direction.
Lead us
Dan
in
would be-
first. Come in,
You want Danny in first?
Yeah. Now we take the 25 in your pocket or something, because I don't know what lens we're gonna want.
Is it?
The 18 on the camera, the 25 in your pocket,
We'll bring Jack straight in, Stanley.
and the 14.5 in somebody else's pocket.
Stanley, what you do? Bring Jack straight in?
Les has to bring him in.
The way we went when he was... Yeah. We've got to do his hand and all that. We've got to do, Stanley.
Do it right now. Come on, get him in. Let anybody do it, Brian. Just get him in and let him realize we're out of time.
Harry, can you check the smoke in the centre, please?
Are we going the right way, Les?
Yeah.
Coming around, sir.
We're on our way in.
Don't let him run. He's liable to run into me. Okay. Here we go. Roll video.
Turn over, please.
Roll video.
Speed, Stanley.
But don't look at your hands, Danny. Don't look at your hands when you come around. Keep it low. Come on. Slowly, slowly, slowly. Keep coming. More scared, Danny. Now, go. Don't be a show. Run now, run. Look back, Danny. Look back.
Your mum has said that when you're at home playing with your friends, you like to play a movie making. Is that true?
Right. And also, my friends like to play it, but they don't really understand.
Oh, what do you understand about movie making?
Well, they say, you think you're smart, don't you? You know? Well, you know, and I admit that I do think I am. Well.
When I come up against a director who has a concept that maybe I don't agree with it, maybe I just hadn't thought of it or whatever, I'd be more prone to go with them than my own because I want to be out of control as an actor. I want them to have the control. Otherwise, it's going to become predictably my work. And that's not fun.
Well, many parts of that were good. There were quite a few hiccups, but many parts of it were very good. Let's look at it.
Don't mind to play back, please. Don't break it up, boys.
You didn't, through here, I couldn't tell. I didn't think you got mean enough at the beginning when you said.
At the beginning, at
You
the
know, on the
transition
point,
yeah.
But Shelley, many parts that, the only thing, come and look at it, Shelley. The only part clearly wrong was at the end when you said we've got to get him out of here, as you got strong at the end, and I think it has to be a last desperate begging, you know? And I still think you shouldn't jump on every single emphatic line. It looks fake. It really does. It looks like you,
When I'm that nervous, it's an
Shelley, I'm telling you, it's too many times. Every time he speaks emphatically, you're jumping, and it looks funny.
So he says, I'll put on my Superman suit.
No, I think that line is right.
Right.
When he lays down.
No, I think that line's in the right place.
Okay, Shelley, so you say, what's the matter with you first?
Because what's the matter with you means, why are you so angry? What is the matter with you? It doesn't mean, what are you talking about?
Oh, well, this is where he lays down, though. That's the only thing I was thinking of. You know, when he flops back on the bed. Since that is new, I thought it fit, you know, what's the matter with you?
If you talk,
And then he
if you say
blows
this
up.
right, I'd rather say it here.
Okay.
All right? Honestly, don't think the lines are going to make an awful lot of difference if you get the right attitude. I think you're worrying about the wrong thing. Can we just have a quick chat about it once more, shall we?
Which room was it?
It's inside one.
Yeah. Now this is really a nicer sound for the sort of...
Around anti-clockwise.
Morning, Viv.
Just get that where it's comfortable and then...
Sorry to interrupt this. Could we have a man and a woman to go and sit in the back there by the dancers? Whichever two of you like to go.
Which one's
Two,
those?
man and a woman back there.
Yeah, John.
Yep.
And so, could you just go to one of the empty tables up there on the top there, John, please, up on the left. Right, if you go with John. Thank you.
On the conversations, everybody, just mouth them. Don't speak, and don't nod your heads when you're talking. Just talk naturally to each other.
Okay, right, let's have a big clearance in the set then, please.
Okay, number one.
Only people who should be there.
Now I'm back. There's that pressure on almost every movie set, and it's here as well. It's just Stanley doesn't relate to it because he is doing exactly what he thinks he should be doing at that moment about it, you know, sort of very single-mindedly. He's emotional on the set, you know.
Tell him to reduce the snow.
Alan, stand over here! Alan! Alan, reduce the snow a bit, Al.
You can't even hear us. Reduce the snow. They can hear you when I walk.
Do I have that stuff in my hand? I've got it out.
Right, stand by, boys. Okay, Malcolm? All right, roll video.
Get out, Peter.
Video speed, Stanley.
Turn over.
Right, clear back, boys. Okay, turning, Doug.
No, wait a minute, I forgot it. Hold it.
Cut it. Keep it rolling.
Keep the video rolling.
Keep video rolling.
Reduce the smoke a little, Alan.
Reduce the smoke a little bit, Al.
Okay, turn over.
Okay, turn over. All right, roll video and action, Shelley.
Action, Shelley! Cut it.
Nobody even said roll
There's
video.
no desperation. Oh, come on. What do you mean roll
2
video?
seconds.
We're fucking killing ourselves out here, and you're going to be ready.
I am too. I'm standing
Should we
right
play
by
mood
the
music?
door. No, I can't
Yeah, but when you
hear.
came out like this, you should have just
We're sitting there because they say, wait a minute,
okay.
and then you say
Yeah,
on the radio,
but when you
go.
do it, you've got to look desperate, Shelley. You're just wasting everybody's time there.
I can't even get
Well,
this
bring it
door
against
open.
it.
You have... On the record, I got such a bollocking because they said, turn over, and they said, video rolling and all that, and I got all ready, and jumped up and down, and then they said, never mind, cut it. And then I went to take a bite of soup. The next thing I know, action, Shelley. So, if it hadn't been for that, volley of ideas and sometimes butting of heads together, it wouldn't have come out as good as it did. And it also helps get the emotion up and the concentration up, because it builds up anger, actually, and you get more out of yourself. And he knew that, and he knew he was getting more out of me by doing that. So it was sort of like a game.
Anything you do as many times as a successful actor, you can't have one set of theories. You can go for years saying, I'm going to get this thing real, because they really haven't seen it real. They just keep seeing one fashion of unreal after the other that passes as real. And you go mad with realism, and then you come up against someone like Stanley who says, yeah, it's real, but it's not interesting.
You appreciate all the pain. I mean, you always dislike whatever the cause is of pain. You always resent it. So I resented Stanley at times because he pushed me, and it hurt. And I resented him for it. I thought, why do you want to do this to me? How can you do this to me? You agonize over it. And it's just a necessary turmoil to get out of it what you want out of it. I mean, we had the same end in mind. It was just that sometimes we differed in our means. And by the end, the means met. And I find I really respect him and really like him, both as a person and as a director. I mean, I'm amazed. He's taught me more than I've learned on all the other pictures I've done within 1 year's time on one picture.
Shining is hypnotic. I don't even say I like it. I can't help watching it. It's one of those movies where you know you're in for some terrible things are going to happen, but you can't look away.
Kubrick's films do not reveal all of their mysteries at one time.
It's underlying story of a father's hate for his child and his wife. The murderous father is a very, very frightening one.
You would never hurt Mommy or me, would you?
There were some moments in the film that were as chilling as anything I've ever seen on film. Just surprising, surreal images.
Great coffee, isn't it?
The sense of the film was that you ain't seen nothing yet.
The making of The Shining was very much influenced by the same kind of thinking as the making of Clockwork Orange. That Kubrick saw that he was being outpaced in certain areas. Other people were doing things better than him, and he wanted to come in and do something so great that they would be blown out of the water.
Well, that just happens to be exactly what I'm looking for.
Now, Kubrick said you shouldn't worry too much about your successes, you should worry about your failures. Because your failures mean that you're limited in your opportunities for the future. Barry Lyndon is a fabulous film, but unfortunately it didn't make that much money. So he couldn't, after Barry Lyndon, make Napoleon, his dream project. So he had to find a project that would perhaps make him money.
For a long time he'd been interested in not horror stories, but sort of gothic stories, stories that were somewhat sinister, stories that had a slightly mystical, ghostly element.
I don't want to go there, Mrs. Torrance.
Well, how come you don't want to go?
I just don't.
He'd been particularly influenced by a story by Stephen Crane called The Blue Hotel, which he'd read as a young man. And he did like the idea that a person might arrive in such a place with a death wish. So years later, when he was offered The Shining by Warner Brothers, he didn't want to do a conventional horror movie. Then he read a novel by an American writer named Diane Johnson called The Shadow Knows and asked her to adapt the King novel.
He was very literary, and as a serious artist, his understanding was very much more at the thematic and psychological and human level than just wanting some visuals with people sneaking down halls with knives and stuff. He wanted it to make sense in real psychological terms. Just as the great horror tales do, they all have some underlying paradigm which can explain why they touch us or scare us.
When he bought the rights to this story, he knew already that he was going to change it drastically. And when he bought the rights, he reserved the right to do that. That's a very important part.
Stephen King's novel is unashamedly mystical. There are ghosts and horrors in this hotel. It is haunted because it's built on an old American Indian graveyard. Out in the gardens there are these topiary animals made out of plants which get up and walk around and chase you and so on.
There was always a question about to what extent the supernatural was real. Whether, for instance, a ghost could open the freezer door and let Jack out. And finally, we just had to abide by some inconsistencies, that supernatural things would happen.
He made it much less specific, and again, typical for Stänli Kubrik and his handwriting, not explained. Many things are open-ended. We don't get the classical Gothic horror film answer of a beginning and here's the story and this is how it ends. No, we don't know. It remains full of ambiguity.
Mom?
Well, Stanley said to me, what comes first? It was like the chicken and the egg. The exterior or the interior of the hotel? I said, well, you need the exterior, and then we can base all the interiors on the shape.
The aerial shots of the Overlook Hotel were actually the Timberline Lodge in Oregon, and the close-ups were an exterior set in the UK.
When was the Overlook built?
Construction started in 1907.
Now, Kubrick was a stickler for authenticity. So he sends people out to photograph hotel rooms all over America. And he gets these thousands and thousands of photos and he says, right, I'll have that room, I'll have that room. And that's how the Overlook Hotel got its rooms and got the different looks for each of the rooms.
Perfect for a child. He didn't believe in set design.
he always said, why should I be so egomaniacal to think that of all the rooms that have already been made by all the great architects in the world, why would I suddenly come up with a new and better room? I'll just find either the piece of music that's been written over the last 150 years, or the room, or the shirt, or whatever it is. He just believed in getting the best of it and innovating within that.
The Overlook Hotel itself isn't, doesn't look like the house in the Amityville Horror. It isn't like a frightening house to look at. It doesn't look like the Bates Motel. It's a pretty lodge. But for a sustained chill, it's truly horrifying.
He did like the idea of the Indian graveyard. And because the Irani had all these wonderful Indian motifs, we decided we'd go that route. And I suggested doing a model. So we started building these models to a big scale, 1/2 inch to the foot. And everything became three-dimensional to Stanley. Because we had these models, he worked out a formula where by using certain lighting, like if you used a 2K, that would transfer into so many candles. So he could work out exactly how much lighting he would require for those huge windows.
This place is fantastic, isn't it, hon?
Sure is.
Each window outside had, in the one case, 700,000 watts of lights just ranked up and down on scaffolds that he built. And the other one, 1,000,000 watts of light, so that the lights can be out here, come through the windows, creating this great whiteout. And it's that kind of light that happens in the high latitudes in winter. This cold light that just fills every part of a space and doesn't fall off, And when they crank those lights on, if you have the freedom to move in every direction, to look around, to follow somebody, to wheel around with them, as you do in life, in real life.
Kubrick at this point was getting very preoccupied with moving camera as well. The Steadicam had just come in, and he was able to get Garrett Brown, the inventor of the Steadicam, to come and work on the film.
It is a way of disconnecting a camera from the bloke who's holding it. In the simplest possible terms, people are always in motion. Cameras need to be immune to that motion. The result is you, the ever-moving guy, can keep moving, and the camera has a separate kind of motion. Whatever you want for it, you can do.
On The Shining, since he'd built this whole hotel in an English studio, he could race along these corridors with the camera.
Kubrick had in mind these low tracking shots, the Danny Lloyd eye level. So we simply inverted the camera end of it and hung the camera from its top rather than its bottom. And Stanley had a strange wheelchair made for him by a guy named Ron Ford that allowed Stanley handheld to sit in the chair and be pushed around, right? So in particular on that shot with Danny Lloyd in the big wheel, we contrived this wheelchair shot. And boy, when that lens is 2 or 3 inches off the ground and the carpet is coming by, and then the walls of the set are going by, and it not only has that weird aura of penetrating space, but it also is the great shot of all time for explicating what they're in for in this hotel, how vast it is and how mysterious. And the sound part of it, by the way, was a surprise to Stanley. He had, it hadn't occurred to him, I think, because we were all shocked in dailies to suddenly hear this rug, no rug, rug, no rug. You couldn't hear it unless you had the mic right there.
Nobody liked the topiary animals in the book. First of all, they thought they're hard to do. This was before CGI was really around. Now, of course, the simplest thing in the world. Also, the film was evolving into a much more psychoanalytical frame of mind. And Kubrick, all his life, was a game player. For a while, he earned a kind of living playing chess for money in New York as a young man. He was a puzzle solver. And he also had a model of the maze that he kept in his office, and he would work on ways to move the people around. And the Steadicam, of course, was perfect for that.
Look out! I'm coming in close.
The maze set was, of course, one of the most intriguing and one of the most difficult to work in, just physically difficult.
Danny, you win. Let's take the rest of this walking, huh?
I think what they actually built amounted to about 2/3 of the maze that was implied when you saw that model.
We discovered that the best way was to build all the hedges were boxed timber with chicken wire, and we had all this yew, which was supplied by farmers, and it was all threaded into the wire netting and then trimmed, and it was wonderful.
The maze was astonishingly not as big as it looked in the movie. And the size in the movie is courtesy of the lens we used. We used an extremely wide lens called a 9.8, and we're rigorous about keeping it level. Because if I tilted that lens at all, it just looked totally unreal. The result was that those boxwoods, or whatever they were, looked about 12 feet tall, when in fact they were probably maybe 8 feet, something like that.
I didn't think it's gonna be this big, did you? No?
There's one shot I'm still trying to figure out how they did, though. And that is basically our introduction to the maze, where Jack's looking at the model, and then it cuts to like this high angle of the maze, and you see them walking through there. It feels too high to be a crane shot. It's pretty high up.
I was present when they did that. They shot the model from a scaffold at the appropriate height. And then they built one center section of the maze next to an apartment block.
Stänli worked all that out. We actually built a rostrum, and we cantilevered this out so we could get the camera right clear of the edge, vertically shooting down to the ground. And to my amazement, Stänli actually climbed out and looked through the camera. And I don't think he realised he was out that far in space. So we shot that.
And they were able to carve out just the little bit they shot from the apartment and superimpose it over the shot of the model.
We built that first maze up on the highest bit of ground near the studio. And then eventually we put it into the stage, and then it was all snowed up for the snow sequence. And that was hell in that stage, because the formaldehyde that we used on the hedges was like a gas. And it was just like hell. But it all worked.
And the maze was now styrofoamed up to look like snow. They put hundreds of tons of dairy salt on the floor of the maze for snow, wearing boots that got rotted every week because of the salt. You had to breathe the oil smoke, and it was about 90 degrees in there. We could never find out where we were. I mean, we would do the shots. Danny would run, whichever way he felt like, and we just had to follow him. And we were always lost. We always had to shout and have somebody work their way in with a diagram and get us the hell out of there, right?
In fact, Stänli challenged that it was too easy, and he actually got lost in it. We challenged him. We put him in there one Saturday morning, and he couldn't find his way out.
I'm coming down!
The idea of that was, that in the snow you can see footprints. So obviously with a Steadicam you can move through without having to lay track or anything, so you can go through the virgin snow. And the kid is able to actually backtrack in his own footsteps and hide and move along. So it was a perfect device to use for that.
Very effective. You look at it and you think, how else could you really have done it?
Stänli told me the face, it's the most important thing, the face and then the rest. But start with this, cinema is this. And I remember the gesture. And therefore he also wanted me to have very much input in the makeup and hair, as well as the costumes.
Hello?
In The Shining, Stänli did not really quite tell me how the people should dress, but one thing put him in the right direction was the fact is that, he wanted the people to look Middle America. He didn't want all the clothes to look too worn out or tired.
Yeah, it's the best place I've ever seen.
And I decided that those characters were a little bit more like almost figurines from a catalog. I mean, in my mind, everything seemed to be so perfect. Everything seems to be pristine. But what's underneath all that?
I think it might be a good idea if you leave your radio on all the time now. Over?
Okay, we'll do that.
Everything that could be away from the horror, I tried to do. Anything that could not, in a million years, give indication of darkness.
Of course, I intended to change my jacket this evening before the fish and goose soiree.
Very wise, sir. Very wise.
Stänli was not a director who looked for reality. He was an operatic director. And Stänli said, real is good, interesting is better.
He always worked a lot with actors. I mean, he'd sort of go off in a huddle with whoever, and you could see them talking for a long, long time and really talk things through and chat it through.
Danny, what happened to your neck?
Danny, what happened to your neck?
Shelley Duvall actually had a much bigger part in my original script because, of course, I sympathized with her and I gave her things to say. She was involved in trying to figure out what to do.
You did this to him, didn't you?
He was interested in a person that was probably more in love with her partner than her partner was with her, and who was needy in the relationship, and would seem to be able to be perceived as somebody that might tolerate the intolerable longer than one would think that someone might. And she was able to be very needy.
There's someone else in the hotel with us. There's a crazy woman in one of the rooms. She tried to strangle Danny.
I think he saw that, he saw that she was a gifted actress, but he also knew that he wanted her to literally be at the end of her tether, and therefore he was mean to her on the set, and he pushed her harder in order to get the level of kind of hysteria out of her that he felt that the role needed.
Has it ever occurred to you what would happen to my future if I were to fail to live up to my responsibilities? Has it ever occurred to you? Has it?
Stay away from me.
He felt that he had to create that in his own relationship with her.
I'm very confused.
Kubrick wants the truth, and that authenticity that he puts into all his design is the same with his actors. This is an undervalued part of his films, I feel, because his actors actually exist in the space, in that moment, and he gets them there by whatever means necessary.
God damn.
A lot of trouble went into finding the boy, of course. That was hugely complicated.
Red rum. Red rum. Red rum.
Hundreds and hundreds of children were interviewed in the United States. Obviously, we needed an American voice, an American boy. And we finally hit on Danny Lloyd in Peoria, Illinois.
Great thing about this kid, Danny Lloyd, was he was on the program with Jack and Shelley and everybody else. He was there for Stanley as many times as it took.
How'd you like some ice cream, Doc?
The most famous take was in the kitchens, the scene between Scatman and Danny. And it went to 88 takes.
It's like I go to sleep, and he shows me things. But when I wake up, I can't remember everything.
Scatman said, Stanley, I can't do it anymore. Danny was there. So as a result, we didn't feel like we were torturing him, and therefore we could do it and not feel like we were abusing a minor.
And the fact that Danny happened to be called Danny also allowed a certain ease. It cut out one of the barriers between him and the character, that Kubrick was able to say to him, Danny, do this. And I think the two of them had a really good relationship.
There's room 237 inch.
Kubrick never liked big actors, never liked stars. But when he got around to The Shining, he thought back over actors that he had already thought of using in other films. And his original casting for his Napoleon project, which never got made, was Jack. And also he suited Warner Brothers because he was a bankable name.
Well, I dreamed that I killed you and Danny. Oh, my God.
He thought Jack was a great actor, and Jack is a great actor, and he thought he would be an amazing person who could do the transitional stuff from Jack to Here's Johnny.
What we got involved in was looking at old Nicholson films, and so
That'll do it.
then generated a decision to write a more antic Jack.
I had a lot of discussions with Stanley about how elusive perfection is.
It is very often said, very often in a critical way, that Stanley did so many takes. And this criticism is quite wrong, because first of all, he rehearsed with the camera running. So instead of doing long rehearsals, he just simply called it take one.
Oh dear, I'm so sorry, sir. I always said, when you work for Stanley, it removes the main problem for the actor, which is pressure. He's not going to stop until it's exactly the way he wants it, right, wrong, or indifferent. It is going to be right.
It's his mother. She
interferes.
Jack would give Stanley, in effect, the entire smorgasbord of performance from catatonic to hysterical. He'd give him every gradation all the way up.
Stanley's investment in a film was investment in time. We had a very frugal operation, usually. Few people, small crews, but we took a long time.
It was a way of getting a lot of material so that second thoughts didn't get lost. Juxtapositions you might not have thought of, you could make work now.
Wendy, baby, I think you hurt my head real bad.
Stanley couldn't understand why you spend all this time and money preparing and getting to the actual moment of filming and then rush through the filming. He just felt that that was backwards, that he'd spent 5 years preparing this picture. He'd spent months and months building the sets. Now it comes to this moment, he's going to do 60, 70 tries. Just see what happens, even if take 5 is a terrific one.
Just give me one more chance.
The editor told me, he said, I watch these all the time, I could see it happening. He said, first of all, the actor would give a pretty basic, his best shot. And then Kubrick would say, okay, go again, and he'd do it a little more extravagantly, and then he'd hit about 12 or 14 takes in, he'd start to get tired. So he'd start to save himself. And then Kubrick would keep going, and finally, the actor had nothing left to give, and Kubrick would still want more. So the actors would start doing crazy stuff.
Come out, wherever you are.
You know, funny faces, screaming, howling. And if you look at Nicholson's performance in the film, they're the scenes you see, the 27th and 29th take. But to get those, he had to work his way through. It's very difficult to say, all right, take one, you're crazy. It won't work.
Then I'll huff, and I'll puff, and I'll blow your house in.
I saw Stanley St. Albans, and he asked me, how did you like my movie? And I only seen it once, and I didn't love Shining the first time I saw it. I have since seen Shining 25 times, one of my favorite pictures. Kubrick films tend to grow on you. You have to see them more than once. And I was telling him all the things I liked about it, and he saw right through me. And he said, well, Stephen, obviously you didn't like my picture very much. Tell me what you didn't like about it. I thought Jack Nicholson, who is a great actor, and I thought it was a great performance, but it was almost a great kabuki performance. It was almost like kabuki theater. He said, you mean you think Jack went over the top? And I said, yeah, I kind of did. And he said, okay, quickly, without thinking, who are your top favorite actors of all time? And I don't want you to think, just name off some names. So I quickly, went Spencer Tracy, Henry Fonda, Jimmy Stewart, Cary Grant, Clark Gable. He said, stop. He stopped me. He said, okay, where was James Cagney on that list? And I didn't have it. I thought, well, he's up there high. I said, but he's not in the top 5. He said, you don't consider James Cagney one of the 5 best actors around. You see, I do. This is why Jack Nicholson's performance is a great one.
Here's Johnny!
As far as my wife is concerned, I'm sure she'll be absolutely fascinated when I tell her about it. She's a confirmed ghost story and horror film addict.
A lot of people didn't like it when it first came out because they had read the book. And you knew that it was the house that was the evil spirits inside the house. But in the Shining, you don't know.
Tony, why don't you want to go to a hotel? I don't know. You do too know. Now come on, tell me. Don't want to.
I think to me what gives it that power is that you don't know what really is going on. And to me that's what real horror is all about.
It was a film that seemed always to intend to catch you off balance. Part of its excitement, the unanticipated event.
As soon as you got into the idea of ghosts as being a manifestation of the soul, Kubrick had serious problems with that, because then it comes into the notions of life after death. I think he was more interested in the ghost as an echo, some kind of psychic remnant of the evil that had happened within its walls.
Kubrick took
that source material of that novel and did something else with it. Tried to raise more profound and eternal questions about the nature of evil.
Horror is across the dinner table, across the breakfast table. Actually, horror is in the family, can be, and often is. And it's always hidden, it's always repressed. It's too frightening for otherwise if we think that the horror is so near home. But it is, and that's what The Shining is about.
Whatever the explanation is, I think we have to get Danny out of here.
The child is so smart, and he leads his father into his own death because he's saving himself.
Your son has a very great talent. I don't think you are aware how great it is.
There are two other characters besides Danny who see things. There's Dick, played by Scatman Crothers, and there's Jack. He sees things. Now it's interesting that Dick says that The Shining is passed from generation to generation. It wasn't Danny's mother who passed it on, because she doesn't seem to be aware of anything that's going on. But it's actually Jack, who is the other person with ESP, who is a receptor, but he has no understanding of the gift that he has. You know, he's blocked.
Did you find anything?
No, nothing at all.
And it's Danny's understanding and his learning throughout the film that helps save his mother.
It's he who kills himself. His own madness consumes him. It's like that line in Full Metal Jacket. It's not the gun, it's the hard heart that kills. That's probably the single most cogent statement in any Kubrick movie, I think.
I always knew when I was working with Stanley that you would be making something that you'd be proud of and that would last, and that's really all the rest of it's about. I mean, I look at him as a, you know, as from personal contact as well as from what I know from others, as a man who really succeeded.
He used cinema to reflect what the world or society was thinking and fearing and experiencing at that particular time. So it's completely contemporary. Quite remarkable. He's a remarkable filmmaker.
That's one of the things I love about Kubrick as a filmmaker. He didn't want people to forget about the movie. He spent a lot of his life making it. He wants people to talk about it. He wants folks to discuss it, argue about it, and take it home. The best horror is the horror that you take home with you.
I defy you to name me one Kubrick film that you can turn off once you started. It's impossible. He's got this fail-safe button or something. It's impossible to turn off a Kubrick film.
Every shot has some special effort put into it, some extra bit of concern with composition or lighting or traveling or something. And so he never lets down.
He worked so hard on the imagery, you know, I mean, I believe Stanley probably started a movie with several images in his mind and then let the story evolve from there, got it very concrete.
Shining is the perfect example of a horror genre movie that does not employ the classical horror genre visual elements.
I think the thing about it is that he creates a setting that has a certain kind of peacefulness that belies the story that he's telling.
This is our Colorado lounge.
Oh, it's beautiful.
You know it's extraordinary from the very first shot. Those first helicopter shots tell you that somebody's at the helm who's saying, you know, I'm not just going to give you a helicopter shot, I'm going to give you the longest, steadiest helicopter shot, and how graceful they were, and how misleading that is in terms of what's coming.
Nothing indicates that the horror may happen in this movie. And it's a very conscious decision, because by creating that kind of visual style, you're creating a sense of normalcy. But by doing that, the horror that the characters are experiencing becomes much more believable.
You better run fast. I'm coming in close. You have to keep moving.
You know, there's something very intuitive and wonderful about the way he will find these things that will just become archetypal. The blood coming out of the elevator and the twins, that's very much reminiscent of Diane Arbus's photographs. He'll just totally throw these images at you in a way that will just set you off. The greatest one for me, though, is still the image of the written page, just pages and pages. Your terror in that movie comes from the characters. You're being frightened by a realization of who these characters are. She's curious about what he's written, and he has piles and piles of typewritten pages that all say, "All work and no play makes Jack a dull boy." That's the point at which there's a kind of turning point in the movie. It's the most perfect representation of insanity that you could possibly come up with.
How do you like it?
When the snow begins to fall outside the windows and it begins to build up and you go out into it, and it's always blizzard. It's never cool with blue skies, you know, it's always dark and blizzard and blowing snow. That sense of cold just accumulates.
Action, Shelley!
No fair anymore.
Stanley, with his, photography sense, had this great idea of using fog so that it looked really cold, but he never wanted to see the fog move, It just gave the sense of like a filter almost. So you could only shoot when the wind was less than 3 knots. It took a long, long time to get all the shots we needed. He'd seen some war pictures shot in snow, some black and white, and he realised that there was a diffusion, the cold, foggy get in snow, and he said, let's try it. So we did, and it was brilliant. I mean, he wouldn't look as cold without that smoke.
It was actually a poisonously yellow-looking set with the lights. Stanley did all his own lab timing, so by the time the dailies came back, they'd cranked up the blue and cranked out all the red and yellow, and it looked as it looks in the film, frigid, wintry, cold, mysterious place.
Filmmakers always look for ways to allow the audience to participate in the movie. One of the ways to allow the audience to be active participant is to have mobile camera.
Mr. Ullman?
Yes?
I'm Jack Torrance.
Oh, well, come on in, Jack.
When it comes to The Shining, you think of the camera prowling. You think of the camera close to the floor. It's almost as if there's another character in there following people about. And of course there is. The hotel is keeping an eye on all the characters. So perhaps the camera in The Shining is the hotel.
You're right there with the character. You don't know what's going to happen. Is something going to attack the little boy? It feels very dangerous. It feels very invading.
It's a film about film, in part. What was the necessity of traveling down that hallway? Well, he did it because he could.
I think sometimes Stanley just did that because he didn't want to be like everybody else, and he had a very specific way of telling a story. It's not that he wanted to show off, I'm so different than you, but he said, why does every story have to be told the same way?
And I think that Kubrick had reached a point, frankly, that the more profound ideas that he had expressed in earlier films now had to be presented to a different audience. An audience that had started to find the horror film diet very attractive and commercial.
One thing I could never stand was to see a filthy, dirty old drunkie howling away at the filthy songs of his fathers.
You can identify Kubrick in all sorts of ways in any one of his films, but one of the really admirable things about him is that he chooses such different projects. There are linkages between them, but they're very different sorts of films, finally. One of the characteristics that's so striking about these films is the sense of the visual that you remember long after you've seen the film. I think a mark of a great director is that you leave the theater with certain images forever marked on your mind. And that's certainly true of Kubrick.
I first met him in New York probably in the very early 1950s, and he was already becoming a mythic figure, was already this famous person who had started shooting for Look when he was 3 years old or something like that, you know, so he was protege-ish. He was the most provocative, intelligent filmmaker I've ever known.
His experience in using a still camera probably really helped him, you know, from a photographic point of view. And he certainly understood the way you tell things with visual images. And I'm sure a little bit of that at least comes from the fact that he had been a still photographer.
I don't think he was obsessive about images. I think he just had great taste and was a great photographer and cameraman. So he knew where to put the camera all the time, you know, and so it looked seamless. So, I mean, it was wonderful because all of his pictures looked wonderful. Invariably, the images would be startling. Certainly, Barry Lyndon was creating a time and a place, and so what he did was very effectively take us back to that, and you had a sense of what it was like.
If you can imagine that he was a consummately gifted photographer professionally, he was also a consummately successful chess hustler. And if you think about that and combine the mind of a really complex chess player with the eye of a perfect perfectionist photographer, you have Stanley.
One thing that I love about Stanley's images is that his compositions were very simple. They were very simple and very direct. But there's something about that directness that's very disturbing.
He's very good at creating his own sort of stylistic use of various techniques.
Kubrick's films have fabulous camera movements. When you think of 2001, you think of slow pans. When you think of Barry Lyndon, you think of zooms.
Zooms is something that was used very stylistically a lot in the early, you know, in the 60s and 70s. But Kubrick uses it in a way in both The Shining and in Barry Lyndon in ways that reveal things to you over a course of time.
I know that the more technological knowledge the director has, the better filmmaker he becomes, simply because he understands the emotional aspect of image size.
I think a sense of environment and place was important to him, and the wide lenses always included where the person was, as opposed to what you see in a lot of movies where it's sort of floating heads, talking heads, where everything is blurred around. When you put a long lens on and do what we call a close-up, it tends to blur everything else around you, and it's just kind of a talking head. That's one thing. The second thing was the movement, the sense of movement through those hallways. That's increased like crazy with a wide lens. You get the sense of enormous movement. And somebody coming at you, or a strike at you, or a move toward you or away from you is exaggerated enormously in a wide lens.
So, if you talk about Kubrick, he exactly knows what the lens will give him. A very conventional way of creating a horror in the close-up would be to employ long lens, where you really don't know where the horror comes from. What Kubrick did in Shining, he employed the opposite. He employed 17, 14 millimeters, where you see everything and you don't know where the danger comes from, but you can see the space it may come from. And that's scarier to me than the conventional way of conveying the horror genre.
You know, even though he didn't operate all the time on his films, I mean, certainly handheld camera things he would operate on because he had a real understanding of what he wanted to do, specific to the way he wanted to move the camera.
Kubrick always moved the camera. It's almost like the Steadicam was invented for Stanley.
He lit like a lot of great artists. He had that kind of an eye. He went all the way through the complexities and back to something terribly simple. He used real lights, screw a light bulb in and turn it on and shoot.
That's one of the great things about having a director who is also a photographer. Every one of Kubrick's cinematographers had said that if he wasn't a director, he'd be the world's greatest cinematographer.
He gave me a Nikon with 3 lenses and a package of Tri-X film. and a bunch of instructions. The first one was never use a flash. He was consumed with visuals. He was really a photographer. I mean, that's what he did, you know. He saw you in relationship to your surroundings. That's what spoke to him. It just meant more, I think, to him, those elements in the composition. Stanley had his own Stänli Kubrick technique.
Because he was so strong on imagery, he just loved the fact his creative team, you know, his lighting guys and the set designer, everybody understood what was going on and why. I mean, the costumes and the hair and the makeup worked together. So I worked very closely, for instance, with Milena.
It's interesting to look at Stanley because from the way he chose the shots in Clockwork Orange was totally different from the way he shot The Shining. And it was fascinating how, you know, in Barry Lyndon, he had special lenses and the candles. And he taught me how, you know, explain, because he liked to explain things. He was always very kind and gentle whenever you ask him certain questions. I asked him once about the very wide angle lens he was using in Clockwork Orange, 9.8, and he told me how it should be used.
He would take ideas from anybody. He was voracious for people's views on things, whoever they were. He would listen to what people had to say, and he would take what he thought was right.
The responsibility of an artist is to raise questions, not to provide answers, is to hold a mirror up to society. And Kubrick is a great artist, perhaps one of the greatest that the cinema ever had. His responsibility is to reflect the society back upon itself as he sees it, and not to offer cure-alls or suggestions for how to improve our daily lives.
He was not a predictable filmmaker, and his understanding of the craft, his understanding of how you tell stories using the visual medium are really unsurpassed.
Every single story somehow was so mysterious in the way the story was told. It so kept you guessing, how's this going to turn out? What's going to happen next? I can't even imagine. And the genius of Stanley is you can look at a movie of his 15 times and you'll still give up and you'll be surprised all over again. And I don't know anybody else who possesses that kind of magic.
Really, really sorry that Stanley died. That a great deal of the joy I expected in the movie viewing end of things for the rest of my life has disappeared in a flash, because he won't make those movies that I love to see. Besides losing him as a friend and a mentor, I'm really sorry as just a film goer that he's not doing this anymore.
He was a great friend, a fund of monumental knowledge, a mind-opening person. If you just think of the stuff he did, and he just saw it out in front of him and approached it with wildly high intelligence.
To say he was a great craftsman is to seriously understate something. Stanley didn't change much. I mean, his acceptance speech about Icarus at the Directors Guild, I mean, nothing could be more perfect. The myth of Icarus, flying too high for success. He says, and people always took that as a moral tale about hubris. And he said, let's make better wings.
If one day there's a final history written of the motion picture, when it disappears as an art form and is replaced by something else, the name of Kubrick will stand at the very top, very large, very prominent, very powerful, as one of the cinema's greatest innovators and artists.
The experience of Clockwork Orange, the memories that I have of Stänli Kubrick are intense and highly self-contradictory, like an oxymoron. And it's wonderful. I would never part with those memories. And I wish there were more, but at the same time, I'm glad in a way that it stopped. As I said, it's a funny ambivalence that one feels, and it betrays more intensity of depth of feeling than I was aware of consciously until he died. Over the last several days, I've been trying to look through some of the music that we did for both The Clockwork Orange and The Shining, and I found some passages that nobody's ever heard before that were things that almost made it into the film. And one of the things that almost made it into the film was based on the instrument that's in front of me here. And this is something we call the circular controller. And we shorthandedly refer to it as the circular controller, get it? And it's a control instrument that we built for The Shining. When we asked Stanley what kind of music was he listening to, and he said, oh, you know, things like Sibelius's Valse Triste. And we thought, oh, that's a lovely piece. You know, the ya, 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 ya. And instead of playing that with a keyboard-like synthesizer, which we had the Moog, we thought we'd build an instrument specially for it that could do a singing voice. And this is it here. And I'll show you what it sounds like. You can see that it's immediately different from any keyboard instrument. It's much more vocal, intimate, performing, almost like a violin sound. It takes an awful lot of practice and skill to do this. I'm very out of practice. And you can actually get to the point where you can perform fairly nice, substantial musical lines with this. I'll play for you right now, right off of the computer, which we use for everything for audio nowadays, the cue that we included in the demo tape that we first sent to Stanley for The Shining. And this is the Valse Triste in an arrangement I did using the Circon as the solo instrument. You'll hear it right away. Well, that piece was part of the demonstration reel that we sent to Stanley when we had just been getting involved in The Shining. And the only place it got used was not in the movie, I'm sorry to say, but it was used in Vivian's documentary on the making of The Shining, where it's very effective to end that whole documentary. I'm sorry, though, because it's such a pretty instrument, and I would have loved its mournful and a little haunting, spooky quality to be in the film. The only place that you hear the Circon in the film is this cue, which is called Rocky Mountains, and it's a big, majestic type of music when the family is driving up the hill early in the movie to the hotel. This is what it sounded like. When we first were told to try and write something to the novel, we came up with a lot of music that just never was going to work when the final footage was done. And one of these cues is something that was big and fat and dramatic that we call Boulderado. And it is something we envisioned for the scenes in which you see the mountain in the hotel for the first time. Now, imagine this fitting anywhere in The Shining as we know it. What I haven't played you, though, is some of the outtakes music that was not used in Clockwork Orange. And one of the pieces that I found just recently was something we called Orange Minuet. And it was intended to be used in the sequence in which Malcolm is shown to be cured on stage in what looks like a high school gymnasium. And if you remember, that has currently something called the Overture to the Sun. And we intended instead to play the Orange Minuet, which is this piece. Sure. think that Christian and Stanley both wanted to have that in the film, and they were even getting excited about perhaps putting it out as a single, I thought. That was the impression I got. I hope I'm not misremembering these things. They're so many years ago, you don't know if you're making up the stories or not. But I know they were excited about this piece and were rather heartsick when it really didn't fit the scene as well as they thought it did, and it had to be left out because there was no place else in Clockwork Orange where this piece could be used. One of the pieces of music that Stanley told us would make a good cut for the album was this last piece called Country Lane. It's the way that we ended the album. And it's a nice piece that had a life of its own, quite apart from the film, and for some reason it's become terribly popular. And it's got a great big vocoding chorus. I'll show you that section right now. And it's a upbeat piece which takes place, you remember the scene in which the Droogs, now police officers, happen to run across Alec and they beat him up. And this is the music that takes place in that scene as he's a pitiful wreck in the middle of a thunderstorm, going and finding himself back in the home that he didn't realize he was at. You know, I just noticed the cats are here. And something I haven't told you is that my memory of Stanley will always be of him sort of saying goodbye to us each day after we work with him, holding a cat like this, or maybe a cat on his lap. There was always a cat in the picture. He doesn't want to be held right now, I see. Do you, Charlie? And that's something that seems so human to me and is an inevitable, indelible piece of my linking with him.